Most people spend their whole lives trying to prove they're the smartest person in the room. They correct small mistakes in conversation. They jump in with the right answer before anyone finishes asking. They feel a quiet pressure to show competence in every meeting, every group chat, every family dinner. This need to be seen as capable is so automatic that most people never question it. But there's a pattern quietly used by some of the most composed and respected people in history that goes against this instinct completely. Instead of proving how much they know, they let others underestimate them. Before we get into why this works, hit like and subscribe so more people can learn this way of thinking. Number 1. The cost of constantly proving yourself. Every time a person feels the urge to prove their intelligence, they're spending energy on something that rarely helps them in the long run. This urge feels natural because society rewards quick answers and confident speech. Schools grade students for raising their hands first. Workplaces praise the person who speaks up in meetings. Social circles admire the one with the sharp comeback. Over time, people learn that being visibly smart equals being valued. But this lesson has a hidden cost that most people never calculate because the reward feels immediate while the cost builds slowly in the background. The cost is this. Every time you show your full hand, you give other people information about how to read you, predict you, and sometimes use you. When you always share your best insight, your quickest solution, or your strongest argument right away, you remove your own ability to observe how others react first. You lose the advantage of watching before speaking. This is why so many capable people feel exhausted after long meetings or debates, even when they win the argument. They spent their energy proving a point instead of understanding the room. Stoicism has never taught people to hide their intelligence out of fear or insecurity. It teaches something different, that wisdom is not measured by how much you say, but by how well you choose when to speak. Marcus Aurelius, arguably the most powerful man in the ancient world, wrote privately about restraint, patience, and the discipline of holding back reactions. He did not need to prove his authority through words, because his position and his calmness spoke on their own. This is a lesson many modern people miss, because they confuse confidence with constant explanation. Consider a simple daily example. In a work disagreement, the person who immediately explains every reason why they are right often triggers defensiveness in others. The other side stops listening and starts preparing their rebuttal. But the person who stays quiet, asks a clarifying question, and lets the other person finish completely, ends up with more information and more control over how the conversation unfolds. This is not manipulation. It is patience applied correctly, which is one of the oldest Stoic principles there is. The deeper issue is that many people cannot separate their sense of self-worth from being seen as intelligent. If they stay quiet, they fear being viewed as weak, slow, or unimportant. This fear is rooted in ego, not wisdom. The Stoics were clear that self-worth should never depend on the opinion of others. Epictetus taught that what people think of you is completely outside your control. So building your identity around appearing smart is building your peace of mind on unstable ground. This single realization changes how a person behaves in almost every conversation they have. When you stop needing to prove yourself in every interaction, something shifts internally. You start noticing more, reacting less, and understanding people at a deeper level because you're not busy performing. This shift does not happen overnight. It requires practicing silence, even when you have the perfect response ready. But those who master it often find they gain more respect, not less, because people sense a kind of calm control that cannot be faked and cannot be rushed. Number 2, why silence signals more power than speech. Silence is often mistaken for weakness in a world that rewards loud confidence. Yet history shows the opposite pattern among those who held real influence. Leaders, negotiators, and philosophers throughout time have understood that unnecessary talking gives away position, intention, and even weakness. The person speaking the most in a room is often revealing the most about themselves, while the person listening carefully is gathering information that can be used wisely later. This is not about being secretive for the sake of manipulation. It is about understanding that words, once spoken, cannot be taken back. Seneca wrote extensively about the discipline of the tongue, warning that careless speech leads to regret far more often than careful silence does. He observed that many people speak simply to fill uncomfortable gaps in conversation, not because they have something valuable to add. This habit, so common today in meetings, arguments, and even casual conversations, creates a constant stream of unnecessary information about a person's thoughts, insecurities, and reactions. Someone who has trained themselves to sit with silence, even when it feels uncomfortable, holds a natural advantage because they are not handing out free information. There is a practical layer to this as well. When you allow others to talk first and reveal their position, you gain the ability to respond with more precision. This applies whether you're negotiating a salary, resolving a family conflict, or making a business decision. The person who waits, listens fully, and only speaks once they understand the entire situation tends to make fewer mistakes than the person who reacts immediately. Impulsive responses often come from ego, while measured responses come from awareness. And awareness is the foundation of every Stoic practice. This idea also connects to something people rarely discuss: the discomfort of silence itself. Most people cannot tolerate a pause in conversation. They rush to fill it with opinions, jokes, or unnecessary details. This discomfort reveals an inner restlessness, a fear that silence will be interpreted as ignorance or awkwardness. But the Stoics viewed this discomfort as something to be examined, not avoided. Sitting with silence, even when it feels unnatural, builds the same mental muscle as any other form of discipline. Over time, it becomes a source of strength rather than anxiety. Deliberately choosing not to speak does not mean withdrawing from life or becoming passive. It means being selective, using words only when they carry real weight. A person known for speaking rarely, but meaningfully often commands more attention than someone who talks constantly, because their words are treated as valuable rather than routine. This is the same reason a quiet room gets everyone's attention when someone finally raises their voice. Scarcity creates value, and this applies to speech just as much as it applies to anything else in life. Practicing this daily does not require becoming a different person. It simply requires noticing the urge to speak and pausing before acting on it. Ask internally whether the words about to be said actually need to be said, or whether they're simply filling space out of discomfort. This small pause, repeated consistently, builds the kind of composed presence the Stoics valued above almost anything else. It is a quiet form of strength that grows stronger the more it is practiced, and it rarely announces itself, which is exactly the point. Number 3, the strategic advantage of being underestimated. Being underestimated is often treated as an insult, something to correct immediately through explanation or proof. But throughout history, many of the most effective people allowed this underestimation to continue because it gave them room to operate without resistance. When people believe you're less capable, less informed, or less prepared than you actually are, they lower their guard around you. They speak more freely, reveal more of their intentions, and prepare less defense against you, simply because they do not see you as a threat worth taking seriously. This principle shows up clearly in negotiation and business. A person who appears overly confident or highly skilled from the start often triggers extra caution in others. People double-check their words, prepare stronger counterarguments, and negotiate harder. But a person who appears calm, modest, or even slightly unaware often receives less resistance, because the other side assumes there is less to worry about. This is not dishonesty. It is simply choosing not to broadcast every strength you hold, which the Stoics viewed as a form of humility rather than deception. Cato the Younger, deeply respected among Stoic figures, was known for a plain, understated manner despite his sharp mind and unshakable principles. He did not rely on dramatic displays of intelligence to earn respect. His consistency, patience, and quiet resolve built a reputation that loud argument could never achieve. This shows that real influence often grows slowly through demonstrated behavior over time, rather than through moments of showing off knowledge in front of others. There's also a psychological benefit to being underestimated that most people overlook. When expectations of you are low, any real display of skill or insight creates a much stronger impression than it would if expectations were already high. A person who is expected to fail and instead performs well earns far more respect and trust than someone who is expected to succeed and simply did. This is not about tricking people. It is about understanding how perception works and using patience instead of constant self-promotion to build a stronger long-term impression. This idea also protects a person from unnecessary conflict. When others see you as highly capable or dominant, they often feel a need to challenge you, compete with you, or protect their own position around you. But when you're seen as harmless or simple, people rarely feel threatened enough to attack your ideas or your position. This creates space to think clearly, act without interference, and make decisions without the noise of constant social competition, which is exactly the kind of environment the Stoics valued for developing wisdom. None of this suggests pretending to be foolish for the sake of manipulation or dishonesty. It simply means choosing restraint over display, letting actions and results speak instead of constant self-advertisement. The Stoics never encouraged deceit, but they consistently valued humility, patience, and quiet competence over loud declarations of ability. Choosing to let others underestimate you, while quietly preparing and observing, is one of the most practical applications of this ancient wisdom in a modern world obsessed with visibility. Number 4. Ego, insecurity, and the need to always be right. Underneath the constant need to prove intelligence lies something deeper than simple habit. It is often rooted in insecurity, a quiet fear that if a person does not display their knowledge, they will be seen as less valuable or less worthy of respect. This fear drives people to interrupt conversations, correct small errors that do not matter, and argue points long after the value of winning has disappeared. The Stoics recognized this pattern clearly and named it for what it is, an attachment to external validation rather than internal peace. Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself, through his private writings, that the opinions of others hold no real power over a person's inner state unless that person allows it. This is a difficult truth to accept because most people have spent their entire lives building their self-worth around being seen as capable, smart, or right. When this validation is threatened, even in something as small as a minor disagreement, the ego reacts defensively, often louder and more forcefully than the situation actually requires. This reaction feels justified in the moment, but it rarely leads to peace afterward. There is a clear difference between confidence and the need to always be right. Confidence does not require external proof, because it comes from a stable sense of self that does not depend on winning every argument. The need to always be right, however, is fragile. It requires constant reinforcement, constant small victories, and constant reassurance that one's intelligence is being noticed. This fragility is exhausting to maintain and often damages relationships because people naturally pull away from those who cannot let small things go without a fight. Playing dumb, in this context, becomes a practice in humility rather than performance. It means allowing a small mistake to go uncorrected when it does not truly matter. It means letting someone else feel understood, even when you know more about the topic than they do. This is not weakness. It requires far more internal strength to hold back a correction than it does to blurt it out. The discipline lies in recognizing which battles are worth engaging in and which ones exist only to feed the ego's need for recognition. This practice also protects relationships in ways that constant correctness cannot. People remember how they felt around you far more than they remember whether you were technically right in a conversation. Someone who allows others to feel intelligent, respected, and heard builds deeper trust and loyalty than someone who wins every argument but leaves people feeling small. The Stoics placed enormous value on how a person treats others, understanding that true wisdom includes emotional awareness, not just factual accuracy. Letting go of the need to always be right does not mean abandoning truth or accepting falsehood. It means choosing when truth actually needs to be defended and when it can be released without consequence. This distinction, subtle but powerful, separates reactive people from composed ones. The composed person understands that being right in the moment often matters far less than being respected, trusted, and at peace over the long run, which is the entire foundation of Stoic thinking applied to everyday human interaction. Number 5. Turning this principle into a daily practice. Understanding why smart people deliberately play dumb means nothing without applying it consistently in daily life. This is where many people fail because they grasp the idea intellectually but continue reacting the same way under pressure. Real change requires small, repeated practice in ordinary situations, not just occasional effort during major events. The goal is to build a habit of restraint so strong that it becomes automatic, even in moments of frustration or temptation to prove a point. A simple starting practice is choosing one conversation each day where you deliberately hold back an obvious correction or opinion. This does not mean staying silent about everything important. It means practicing the discomfort of letting a small, unnecessary moment pass without response. Over time, this builds tolerance for silence and reduces the automatic urge to jump in and prove something. Like any discipline, this becomes easier with repetition, and the discomfort felt at first eventually fades into calm awareness. Another practical method involves listening fully before responding, even when you already know the answer. This means resisting the urge to interrupt, finish someone's sentence, or prepare a rebuttal while they are still speaking. Instead, focus entirely on understanding their point before deciding whether a response is even necessary. This single habit alone dramatically changes how people perceive you, because full attention is rare and deeply valued, even though it costs nothing to give. It also helps to regularly ask yourself a simple internal question before speaking. Does this comment need to be said, or does it simply want to be said? Comments driven by ego usually want to be said, fueled by a desire to be seen as smart or correct. Comments that need to be said serve a clear purpose, whether that is helping someone, correcting a serious mistake, or providing needed clarity. Learning to separate these two categories in the moment is one of the most practical Stoic exercises a person can practice daily. Journaling, a practice used consistently by figures like Marcus Aurelius, can also reinforce this discipline. At the end of each day, reflecting on moments where you felt the urge to prove something and noting whether that urge served any real purpose builds long-term self-awareness. This reflection does not require hours of writing. A few honest sentences are enough to notice patterns over weeks and months, revealing exactly where ego tends to take over rational, calm behavior. Over time, this daily practice creates a noticeable shift in how a person moves through the world. Conversations become calmer. Reactions become slower and more deliberate. Respect from others tends to grow, not because of loud displays of intelligence, but because of quiet, consistent composure that people instinctively trust. This is the essence of the high-status power move. Not pretending to be less capable out of insecurity, but choosing restraint out of strength, patience, and a deep understanding that true wisdom rarely needs to announce itself. What separates the composed person from the reactive one is not intelligence itself, but the discipline to manage it. Anyone can gather knowledge. Anyone can develop a sharp opinion or a quick response. But very few people train themselves to hold that knowledge back until the right moment calls for it. This is the quiet skill the Stoics practiced long before modern life added constant noise, constant comparison, and constant pressure to prove worth in every interaction. The ability to stay silent when silence serves you better than speech is not a small skill. It is one of the clearest signs of a mind that has learned to govern itself rather than be governed by impulse. This way of living asks for nothing dramatic. It does not require withdrawing from the world, hiding your abilities out of fear, or pretending to be someone you are not. It asks for something far simpler and far harder. Restraint applied consistently, even when no one is watching, even when proving a point would feel satisfying in the moment. Real strength rarely needs an audience. It shows up in the small decision to let a minor mistake go uncorrected, in the patience to let someone else finish speaking, in the calm that stays steady even when provoked. These small decisions, repeated daily, build a kind of character that cannot be faked and cannot be rushed. It is worth remembering that this practice is not about winning some invisible competition against other people. It is about winning a much quieter, much more important battle within yourself, the one between the urge to be seen as smart and the choice to actually act wisely. The two are not always the same thing, and learning to tell them apart is a lifelong process. Every conversation offers a small test. Every disagreement offers a choice between reacting from ego or responding from calm awareness. The people who understand this distinction tend to move through life with far less friction, far less regret, and far more genuine respect from those around them. If this way of thinking made sense to you, take a moment to sit with it rather than rushing past it. Consider one conversation today where you can practice restraint instead of proving a point. Notice how it feels to let something go, to listen fully, to stay calm without needing to explain yourself. This is Stoicism applied in its most practical form, not as ancient theory, but as a daily discipline available to anyone willing to practice it. If this video gave you something worth thinking about, subscribe for more and share it with someone who tends to talk more than they listen. Sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is simply say less.